Time for a top five this week. Top five political taboos. And when I say political taboos, I mean we could just say the top five taboos. Of course, as Ricky Gervais is always saying, there are lots of things we can't talk about these days. And then he goes on to talk about them in front of hundreds of millions of people on Netflix, therefore kind of undermining his own thesis that there are things we can't talk about. And he goes on to talk about trans people and fat people and all those fun things that he talks about that he says you can't talk about. But so you can talk about anything as long as you're prepared to accept the consequences. And when the consequences of talking about certain things are very severe, it could be, being cancelled, it could be being attacked, it could be being kind of fired from your position, it could be being vilified by lots of people, it could be by being outcast, all sorts of, it could be by losing all your friends and family. All of these are consequences of saying certain things. And in political circles, of course, nowadays we know that politicians, by and large, have to stay within a very tight little bubble. And if they extend beyond that in certain ways, then they end their political careers. And the reasons for this are many, mainly because we have an extremely reactive press, and we also live in a culture where, in a way, we've kind of established a certain set of beliefs, and if you extend beyond those beliefs, it's a kind of, in our world, a Judeo-Christian idea about the world, and if you extend beyond that in any way, then it's almost an aberration. You're an anomaly, you're an aberration, you're an outsider in the tribe, somebody who really must be slaughtered. So let's start off, it's a big subject this, I've only got 10 minutes, but let's see what we can do in 10 minutes. Okay, number one. No, let's count down. We count down, don't we? Okay, so here we go, 5 to 1. Number 5 in the hit parade is, let's get the word right, speciesism. The idea that the human species is somehow elevated above that of the animal kingdom. And this is a very crude and crass observation, but something that we've kind of decided that is just a reality. It's a simple truth that we are an elevated species who is attempting to get closer to a kind of God, and the other animals are kind of these peripheral characters in our world. Now, none of this actually bears any analysis. Of course, there's no truth in it. We've decided for our own conveniences this is the truth, and nobody really can stand up in Parliament and say, hang on a minute, what are we, us arrogant little kind of monkeys wandering around, acting like the bloody king of the jungle, and at the same time kind of slaughtering everything about the natural world around us, as if somehow they are not elevated, neither the plants nor the fauna, but in this case I'm talking about other animal species who have no rights whatsoever, or very limited rights. We eat and we produce, for example, chickens as if they are corn. Chickens to us are corn. You plant them, they grow, you kind of chop all their heads off with a giant combine harvester, and I think there's 8-9 million dead a day in the UK, and we kind of assume this is okay. But I don't want to go down this route because I know you love eating animals. Who doesn't? That's what we do, don't we? We've decided that eating animals and killing animals and torturing animals it's natural. Sorry to interrupt my own video, but this isn't a plea for you to subscribe, nor is it some weird advert for NordVPN. It's simply that at this point in the video, I go on to list a lot of things which are perfectly natural, but which we have outlawed in order to make my argument against those. Oh, that's the nuclear siren going off. Can you hear that? I don't know whether I should rush back to the basement, or whether or not I should just sort of hold out. Maybe it's better to go down. Anyway, the point is this, that that I go on to list a whole load of things that are natural in order to kind of make my argument that the slaughter of and torture and abuse of animals, certainly the eating even of animals, is natural. Unfortunately, my list is too extreme. There are too many things that are natural that are really horrific, and in there I mentioned some things which were flagged up. I'm not going to mention them again, obviously, but if we think about something that's natural in some primitive tribal groups, like for example cannibalism, it does give you an idea. But there are things that in many ways are even more worse than that to the modern mind. So I've had to take that out. Okay, back to the video. I've gone on enough. Pol Pot decided to chop the heads off 3 million Cambodians. We made a big song and dance about it. 10 million chickens a day? Meaningless. Because no politician will stand up and will say, actually, that if you torture and kill an animal, particularly your dog or your cat, but also a sheep or a cow or a pig or a chicken or a squirrel or a hedgehog, just like those little kids go out and they do terrible things to these animals, is that should be punished in the same way as if it were a human being. Without this concept of us being an elevated species, there is no reason why, if you decide, I'm not going to talk about some of the horrific things that go on, but this is kind of very common. And the reason I'm not going to talk about it is because it's too distressing, and I don't want to think about it. But people are torturing animals all the time, every day, in one way or another, either through factory farming or just because your pet is it's something that you can control, you can abuse. It's a kind of outlet for your own issues. Next time somebody kills their dog, next time somebody tortures a squirrel or a pigeon, they should be tried for murder. And I would like a politician to stand up and say that. Enough of this speciesism, and, let's get a handle on this horror. And I think the world would be a much better place. And I think it would make us kind of confront our moral hypocrisy. So that's number 5 in the kind of taboo subjects. Number 4, I would say, is euthanasia. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, hang on a minute, Harry, what are you getting on about? Euthanasia was just discussed in the British Parliament. Yes, it was, and that was very unusual. And it has, of course, become law in some American states, like Oregon, and also it's legal in Holland, and it's legal in Switzerland and various other places. But generally, and amongst most of the nations, it's something that is a taboo subject. Suicide, you see, and again, this is down to the Judeo-Christian idea. It's the same with the speciesism. It's the same with euthanasia. It's one of those systems, one of those beliefs, one of those ideas that's caught up in a load of religious claptrap about the so-called sanctity of life. We don't like to see people or animals suffer, and animals have the privilege of being able to be taken to a vet and euthanized, so they don't spend the remainder of their pitiful life in agony. For us, we don't have that option. And the reasons we don't have that option that have been given in the parliamentary debate, for example, in the UK, which, by the way, has not passed because the House of Lords have made thousands of amendments, which is purely a device in order to prevent the bill from happening. These old codgers in the House of Lords are determined that this bill should not pass. For what reason? Well, it's for religious reasons, to do with some idea of the sanctity of life, and they hide it. They hide it by pretending there is a rationale to their decision making. And that rationale is that's what's to stop somebody putting down their granny to get them money from their will. This is just such utter rubbish. There are so many mechanisms that we could have to prevent that. It's just completely garbage. And so, for the time being, the hospitals are full of people who are in agony, who cannot be let go of in a humane way. So, nobody will stand up and actually just point out the ridiculous nature of their arguments. Number 3, in the hit parade. Well, I think I might have to put religion. So religion, we sanctify religion. We kind of, it's religious organisations. They get huge amounts of tax benefits, and we see them as kind of almost the foundational underpinning of everything, even if we don't believe. And of course, in the UK, I'll talk about the UK, but you could apply this anywhere. A lot of the traditions are wrapped up very closely with religious ideas, and even though there's meant to be a separation of church and state, in practice, as in the previous examples I've given, this kind of Christian idea has infected everything to some extent, so why do we do that? Why does everybody go into hushed tones when we have to talk about people who've got religious beliefs, as if somehow, we must step back, we must be silent, the respect must come in. I mean, even if their religious belief is something of the order of, say, somebody who believes the earth is flat, once again, we must sit down, stand, and offer a kind of respect. But nobody said, why doesn't anybody stand up and actually tell the truth? I don't know why. Why don't we just admit that religious belief systems are a form of mental illness? Now, of course, they are a coping strategy for life, and everybody should be entitled to a coping strategy. I'm not saying that we abandon those things. Fine. Whatever gets you through. Yeah? Was it John Lennon who said that? It's great, but it's a coping strategy. It's not based on anything else. It's something that is an aberration of the human mind. If we think of the clinical definition of sanity, it's a dedication to reality as it really is. So on that clinical basis, somebody who believes in, and we know the kind of beliefs that are wrapped up in pretty strange things, somebody who kind of really genuinely believes that, it clinically is suffering from some form of mental illness. But nobody will actually stand up and say that. And as I said, as a coping strategy, it is fantastic. Good luck to you all. But the idea that it should infect anything to do with politics or education or anything like that, there should be absolutely no crossover whatsoever. So I would say that is where are we? That's number 3. So we're getting close to the biggest political taboos. Number 2, licensing. Licensing. What do I mean by licensing? We're treading on dangerous territory now. I know that, probably get cancelled, like everybody else. But should we have a license to do anything we want to do that we believe is kind of a human right and natural? Is it the right of every single adult to bring forth children into this world? The proliferation of births, of life coming into this world, is it just a human right? Just by being alive, you can do that. And then we have established societies now. We live in a society with an established order, an established idea about what that society should be. Would it be unreasonable for people to seek a license to have a child? What if you are bringing a child into a sort of heroin-addicted deprivation? What if you're bringing children into the world who can't who will never see the joy of a nappy, but will also always be forced to do their stuff on the carpet, surrounded by in a drugs den, for example. Now, I know that's a very extreme example, but I don't hold back on it because this is reality. And at least somebody should mention the fact that bringing children into this world, although it is something that many people desire to do, maybe under certain circumstances be considered a form of abuse. Well, I would say that's my number 2 taboo of my political taboos. And as you see, they sort of get more and more dangerous as you go on. But because I have the word political in the title, my number 1 political taboo is the state of Israel. And I don't mean the situation with Israel, I mean the actual national state, the statehood of Israel, its history, of what it is and what it's done. And I am not going to even talk about that. It's just too big a taboo. It's something that's best left unsaid. The dangers inherent of saying anything about Israel, let alone in a shed at the bottom of a garden, I mean, in a parliament, is almost unheard of. I mean, you know, and I will leave it to you to think about why people are afraid to speak their truth about the state of Israel. Then, you know, I'll leave it with you. I'm certainly not going to dig myself an early grave by saying anything else on the subject. So that's my kind of top 5 political taboos as I see them this morning. And it may well change over time. And I'm thinking of like whether we should have some other kind of close up, kind of runners up. And I guess that political taboo involve maybe the idea of the reason that societies generally aren't equal is because there is something inherently wrong with the system, because it's controlled by and large by people who have money and don't want to lose it. And so they kind of play lip service with poverty and deprivation, but they don't really ever address it. In fact, I don't think just actual kind of poverty has ever really been discussed, actually. I mean, it kind of gets mentioned here and there, but in a way, with 15 million people living in poverty, even in the UK, and probably half of those children, you'd think that it would be the only thing they talk about in Parliament. And of course, the world is awash with money. The UK is full of money. There's money everywhere, but it's not being distributed equally. And there are various reasons for that, to do with control over the mechanisms. So I think that's a taboo subject in itself. Drug legalization, I mean, pure total drug legalization, that's also a kind of taboo. It's something that sometimes gets mentioned here or there by some weird backbencher who's had a particular experience, and it's kind of shouted down immediately and lost in time. Again, there's a kind of Christian notion behind this. The idea that there are certain things that we have to have rules about, even if they don't make any sense. We need, even if there are things that don't kind of bear analysis, that are not necessarily good for society, we need to evoke a kind of moral puritanism in order to give that feeling in society that things are okay. That was a bit confusing, but you know, I think hopefully you know what I'm talking about. And perhaps a slightly more obscure and kind of highly political taboo, the final one I'll leave you with, is farming subsidies. Now, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe that 40% of the European Union funds, 40%, is diverted towards farming subsidies. In other words, we pay farmers to produce food, which is maybe, I don't know enough about the detail of this in order to make an astute observation or have a great opinion about it, but it is a contentious subject, but it's never or very rarely mentioned. There are many assumptions going on, and why this is, if you're interested in why 40% of all of the money in the EU goes to farming subsidies, then it might be worth looking up and finding out a bit more about it. But I'd like to know why the other day I spent €2 on a single courgette. And it has been known that I have spent €1.70 on a single small red pepper. Now, if that was the case, that the value of those products was really as high as nearly €2 each, I mean, it would mean that the people who are growing that kind of food would be billionaires. Because farming is not essentially complicated. In fact, it's one of the most simple businesses. Anyone who's owned a small holding or a kitchen garden will know what I'm talking about. You throw seeds on the ground, you water them, and in summer you have so many courgettes that you wander around your friends and the locals and your neighbours with big plastic bags full, saying, "Can you take these off my hands? My garden is full of them." All I did was throw a few seeds down, and now I've got hundreds of the bloody things. Thousands even. So, yeah. Well, there you go. There are my top 5 political taboos, and I gave you 3 bonus ones. In other words, the really big questions, the really big things that are happening are not generally discussed. Parliament seems to be a place for the detail. Whether or not stamp duty is going to be 1.25% or 1.4%. Little details like that. It really never looks at the big picture. I mean, there must be a reason for this. I haven't got time to think about it right now, but be sure I will. And I suspect it's because all of the cases I've mentioned, there are certain interests who are working very hard to make sure that those interests are always respected by the powers that be.